All right, team. So I'm going to get into it. Remember, these sessions are every Thursday. I keep them. I try and keep them under 30 minutes, so 20 to 30 minutes tops. And appreciate anyone sending me any questions they have prior to the session. And I try and choose one topic and go into detail on it. I'll leave some time for questions at the end. If you do want to use the little chat box, I'll keep my eye on it. If you want to throw a question in there, I'll stop and answer it. Okay, so today's session, the science of fasting and should you be trying it? Okay, so firstly, last week, the reason we did starvation mode and metabolic damage was to sort of debunk the most common question around fasting, which is, will it hurt my metabolism? And so let's start on the foundation is there's no metabolic hurt from or obviously damage done from going through extended periods of caloric deficits, and that includes fasting. So we can put that to bed. And I'll just give you two names if anyone's keen to look further into this. These are the two guns of the research around fasting. One, Dr. Peter Attia, A-T-T-I-A, and Dr. Dom D'Agostino. I actually don't know how to spell that. D'Agostino. But why do I like these guys? They've obviously got their own research labs and really well accredited. They're both actually athletes themselves. So Peter Attia is a world-class endurance swimmer and cyclist. Dom D'Agostino is a weightlifter. And they lead the charge on a lot of the fasting science that's being out there at the moment. And it's interesting, I came across Dom D'Agostino about 10 years ago when I was helping a dear friend of mine with some, they had cancer and they were getting some treatment, and I was trying to work out what is the best protocol nutrition-wise for pre and post treatment for cancer. And there's a lot of stuff around fasting and ketogenic diets around that, which are actually more commonplace now in hospitals. But he's an absolute weapon, or they're both weapons if you want to look further into it. So let's get into it. So firstly, before we start talking about fasting, let's just understand diets in general, that they're a combination or one of or all three of these next three things. Okay, so most diets are either A, they have some sort of dietary restriction, so which means that they take out certain food groups. So being a vegetarian, say, that means not eating any animal products, or vegan, not eating any animal products, or doing a ketogenic diet means having really high fat and not many like carby vegetables and everything like that. The second one is being in a caloric restriction, which just means eating less food. Okay, and the third area is being in a time restriction. Okay, so reducing your feeding window, which is fasting.
Just making some extra.
Who's that? Is that you, Marta?
Not on mute.
Marta. Hey, cute little voice. Put your
I was just saying what I was having for dinner.
Yeah, it's just yelling out what you're having for tea. So just have that in your head, right? Because we're talking about these three things a little bit tonight. So, but we're talking fasting is actually reducing the window of feeding. Okay. If you think about 4 and 4, if you've ever done 4 and 4 or fast, we use all three of these protocols during it at different times. And that's to actually give people a sense of which is the best protocol for them. Okay. So there's different types of fasting, and I'll go into those now. So, and by fasting, what that actually means is you only can have water only. You can have like tea and supplements like you might magnesium and all that sort of stuff. That's all cool, but you can't have anything with calories, okay? And that includes sweetener as well, because that can have a metabolic effect on you. So that's what we mean by actual the fasted state. Is it's typically water only, okay? So there's three main types of fasting. The first one is called time restricted feeding. It's commonly, most people know this as the 16 and 8. So, which means there's a 16-hour window where you fast for. So for instance, I'll have my dinner at 8 p.m. and I won't eat again till midday. And so my feeding window will be from 12 to 8. Okay. Now that can be anything. It can be 10, 14, it can be 18, 6, it can be 24, right? There's no real rules with that, but that's time restricted feeding. The second one is intermittent fasting, okay, or IF, which is it's the one people think they're doing the most, but it's typically not done that much. Okay, that one means a minimum of 24 hours without feeding. The most typical protocols in that are like once a week, not eating for a full day. Okay, so you'll eat dinner, go through a full day, and then eat the next morning. Okay, so it's a bit longer than 24 hours. Other protocols that are common with that, it's like having a 3-day fast like once a quarter, or a 7-day fast every 6 months. They're pretty common ones. And again, there's no rules with it. Like, people can make up their own crazy iterations of it, but that is intermittent fasting. And the third one, which it's actually labeled, I think, really by the health industry as fasting, but it's not really fasting. It's alternate day fasting. So the best way to describe this, because most people know it, is like the 5 and 2 diet. Okay, and the 5 and 2, if you don't know what it is 5 days of unrestricted eating and then 2 days of caloric restriction. So it's a maximum of 500 calories on those 2 days. Now, you could turn that into time restricted feeding. Say if you only had your 500 as one meal, that would count as fasting. But most people don't end up doing that. They might have a bit of fruit, and then some dinner or something like along those lines, which isn't fasting at all. So when we talk about all the science behind this, I'm not talking about this one, the alternate day fasting. I'm talking about either intermittent fasting or time restricted feeding, okay, as far as health benefits are concerned. Cool. All right. So let's get into it. So I'm going to go on the next sort of 5 to 8 minutes, pretty heavy into health benefits and all the studies around that. And it's pretty interesting, but if you zone out for a few minutes, that's okay too. I'll just go through it and then I'll give you my take on it, okay? So what do the studies say? In 2016, there was a paper comparing intermittent fasting to caloric restriction, and this was in healthy humans, okay? So they found that there was massive improvements in fasting glucose, improved insulin sensitivity, improved manufacture of fat loss hormones. Similarly, a 2018 paper, which was studied pre-diabetic men, so these are unhealthy populations, also found improvements in multiple cardiometabolic health markers beyond which would normally occur with weight loss, even though they're both in a caloric deficit, right? Also, in healthy humans, without any chronic medical conditions, there was a big meta-analysis study done in 2019, and it showed that intermittent fasting improved glycemic control, insulin resistance, it reduced BMI, and it consistently showed improvements in all metabolic health markers, which is pretty amazing. In 2020, that's another study also found that in fit individuals, interestingly, there was a reduction of blood pressure and endurance training effects, which sort of makes sense because as you become you become more fat adapted, which is the primary fuel during endurance. So there's some endurance upside there. And another interesting one is that they were predisposed to losing more abdominal fat, okay, when they did prolonged compliance to fasting, okay. So studies have also shown other positive health effects, and this is a really interesting one. Now, just keep in mind that in these studies that most of them are in a caloric deficit, but these benefits are above what you would normally see from being in a caloric deficit. And this is a big one. It's cognition. It's a really common one too when you have been through a lot of fasting, and people say their mental acuity is better. But studies have shown that increases in spatial memory, associative memory, and working memory are evident. And there's current studies going on in this space around dementia and everything, because they found this is obviously helpful in some way to the brain and cognition, but maybe that can be replicated as a protocol for people with dementia and the like. Okay. Really interesting, like obviously with fasting, you've got this uneven flow of glucose into your system. So you're not constantly feeding. So your body has to actually start manufacturing its own glucose, and it does that through ketones, okay, to keep your brain alive and functioning. And there's some interesting stuff that happens when you are ketogenic during a fasted state. And a lot of this stuff, what I'm about to mention, is where most people have heard about fasting and anti-aging, and that's a lot of where the study is going at the moment. Now, just before I tell you what it is, just so you know, there's been no, because of the length of study, there hasn't been human trials in this. There's been a lot of animal trials, but the science in it is really strong. They've found a lot of upswing in the antioxidant defenses, in DNA repair, in your mitochondrial function, in the down regulation of inflammatory markers. And the big one is autophagy, okay? Has anyone heard of autophagy before? Okay, so this is the one that really spikes a lot of people's interest. And this is actually links back to what I was saying initially with the cancer treatment. Autophagy is the process in a fasted state that your body gives up damaged cells for fuel. Okay, so just say I haven't, and now just so you know, this has been shown in extended fasting. They don't know if it works in short-term fasting. So let's say this is 3 days plus. Autophagy is definitely present. And what that means is that if I've got like a torn hip or some damaged heart or some nerve cells somewhere, these bad cells and even disrupted DNA can be fixed through extended fasting. And this is where a lot of the anti-aging, this is the science around anti-aging and fasting, that's where it's going, is because of this strong autophagy effect. I'll give you an example of this that I myself have been through. So it might have been 2 years ago now. Shauno will remember this, that Chris, Tony and myself, we did a 7-day fast. We were learning about this sort of stuff coming out, and all three of us were broken in some way, and we're keen to give it a go. And so we did a 7-day fast together. I probably wouldn't do it while I'm working again. That was a bit crazy, but and we all trained pretty hard during it. So I was doing, well, Chris and I were doing 3 like short, hard weight sessions a day. At the time, I had a really bad hip. I had chronic hip injury. I had pain walking. I couldn't run. And long story short, in that after that week, that 7 days of fasting, my hip was pretty much 98% healed, and it continued to be healed. And you can't put that down to placebo. I was lifting better towards the end of the week than doing stuff that I couldn't do for 6 months previously. And so I put that down to that autophagy effect. And so it's definitely real and happens. So that's really super interesting. Cool. Any questions on any of that? No?
Yeah, I have a question. Did you guys literally not eat anything for 7 days besides water?
Yeah. No word of a lie. Yeah, it was 7 days. It's easier than what you think. Like your headspace, it's like hard to get your head around. It's actually really hard in the first couple of days, and then becomes quite easy. The middle of it, and then as the finish line becomes closer, you start dreaming about all the food you're going to eat and lots of stuff, and that's what makes it harder.
Of course.
Which is interesting. I'll actually touch on that in a minute. This blunting of your hunger, which actually happens during fasting, which is interesting. But yeah, there's definitely, regardless of the whole body weight and body composition thing, there's definitely other massive health benefits from fasting for sure.
Nick, did you, sorry for being late, by the way.
Yeah, that's all right.
There's obviously, you've seen those health benefits from that 7-day fast and having water only throughout it, but was there anything other than being a grumpy bugger for 7 days, any negative effects that came through negatives that would come out of a 7-day fast like that?
I think probably like just balancing work and home. That if I would definitely do it again, but I'd be like go to Thailand and do it over there or something where I didn't have, you know, I'm in a facility or like I'm relaxed and all that sort of stuff. It's just managing your emotions during it and managing people and all that sort of stuff. That's the most challenging thing. Coming home and just being zonked out. And it's interesting. You go through periods where it's you feel really, really good, and it's those initial 3 days. They're pretty horrific. And I definitely wasn't a good dad during those 3 days for sure. So
Did you lose weight, body mass index?
I lost like 10.9 kilos on that.
Oh my,
God.
10.9 kilos.
Yeah.
Oh
I
God.
think even Tony, who's like 70 kilos, he might have lost 8 kilos or something. Like it's not. Yeah.
Do you think that was all fat or like muscle mass as well?
Yeah, no. So that's interesting. So none of us lost any muscle mass. Yeah, at all. And I've got some stats around that as well during fast.
I'm about to
Is that
put you
because
on
you
the spot
continue
here,
training?
Nick.
Sorry.
Yeah.
What about women fasting with their periods? I assume it would be different for women.
I actually don't know about that. I couldn't give you a straight answer, but it would definitely be harder for sure. Like if I just knowing how women are during their periods with dietary compliance, I definitely would say that complying to a fast. I can't speak to what the health implications of that are, but just keep in mind, think about historically, evolutionary wise, we've only been in this really fed state for the last 50 years. I'm sure that women had periods on 3 days fast 200 years ago and still managed everything. So, but from an emotional standpoint and a dietary compliance standpoint, I would assume that would be quite a challenging period to put it in for sure.
Women actually stop menstruating when they lose too much body mass anyway.
Yeah, remember, this is mass body weight, not fat. It's impossible to use 10 kilos of fat, right, in a week. So we're talking about fluid loss. And I actually talk about that in the end. It's one of the things about fasting that I don't like for people, and they need to understand. Cool. All right, I'll crack on. I've got a few more science stuff, and then I'll give you my thoughts. Hang on, where was I? Okay, so other interesting stuff about from the studies about fasting is it's got, as far as like weight loss, we just spoke about weight loss, there's a real upswing or positive effect, it seems to be in obese people. So obese people versus two groups of obese people, both in a caloric deficit, one fasting, one just doing dietary restriction. The obese people at least initially have a faster weight loss, okay? So there's something to do there. It's probably down to metabolic health or metabolic markers. And in the same studies in lean individuals, just so you know, in lean individuals, there's no difference in fat loss, okay, for extended periods of time. So even though you might see weight jump around on the scales and get excited by that, so for extended periods, both in the same caloric deficit, there's no difference, okay, for fat loss, for fasting. There's a lot of metabolic difference for metabolic health and inflammatory differences and stuff. Big one, and this is really interesting to know, and we just talked about it a little bit, is that there's a theme amongst all studies and all participants that with consistent fasting, there's a reduction in hunger overall. So this blunting of your appetite seems to happen. And they're not exactly sure that the reason for that, but I've got a theory on it because I think it's down to meal timing. So if you've got someone, if you're trying to put them in a caloric deficit just through normal dieting, if you get them to time, say they have 3 meals a day and their meals are at 7, midday and 6 p.m, and you get them to stick to that really, really consistently, you upregulate your body sort of time stamps it. So it starts to know where those feeding windows are, and it'll only upregulate the hunger hormones close to that feed window, Whereas opposed to, you think about how humans eat at the moment, it's all over the shop. Sometimes they skip breakfast, sometimes they have 3 meals, 2 snacks, sometimes it's 5 meals, sometimes it's all, so your body's always in this state like, I'm going to get more food, I've got to get more food. And so we've got a warped perception of hunger at the moment, and fasting seems to get people back into a hunger blunted state, at least for a period of the week or month or whatever they're doing it for, which is a super positive, I think. There's been no, as I mentioned just before, no negative effects shown in relation to muscle mass, and that's been sort of down to a fact that when you're in a fasted state, so your body stores glycogen, which is sugar in your muscle and your liver, that most of the glycogen is taken from the liver, not the muscle. Okay, so you've still got ample, like we showed on that 7-day fast, ample deposits to actually use for exercise and for output and everything. And another big question that I get a lot around fasting is this notion of the losing metabolic rate down to the thermic effect from food. Anyone heard of the thermic effect of food before? Yeah. So I taught this massively. Shauna used to teach us all the time too. Little Twigs on the Fire, Shauna, yeah, you love that one. But so essentially what it was is it was really big. There was science around it, but it's since been disproven that say you have 3 big meals. If you split those 3 big meals into 6 smaller meals, the analogy was it's like putting 3 big logs on the fire. The fire gets sort of smothered and your metabolic rate slows down, versus putting 6 little sticks on it. It would burn really bright. So you'd have an upswing in the thermic effect. The thermic effect is actually the energy it takes to process a meal or metabolize a meal. Okay, so that's since been disproven, and the thermic effect still exists, but it's in relation to calories, not how the calories are split up. So the example is, say you eat one 2,000 calorie meal versus 5 little ones. The 2,000 calorie meal just has a massive thermic effect. The 4 little ones have the same, but in 4 parts, 25% each, if that makes sense, right? So there's no loss of thermic effect from yes, any type of fasting, just so you know. Cool. All right. How are we going? Beautiful. So my thoughts, I'll give you a wrap up of what I think about it now. So the data is super strong that fasting is a great protocol to enhance metabolic health, and especially in obese populations can be obviously something that's worth looking at, because it seems to suggest that at least initially getting them going, it could be a really good option for them for weight loss anyway. As I mentioned before, like it really makes sense to me, fasting, with how we lived our lives, before, I guess over 1 million years or 2 million years of evolution. Most of our time we did probably spend in a fasted state. So you would expect, say in the last 100 years, this disruption to how we usually take in food would lead to some sort of disruption in metabolic systems in the body. So that sort of makes sense to me. Obviously the lifespan thing, so and genetic health, there's some really strong evidence around in animals that particularly in mice trials, and I think that will, what everyone's sort of leading towards, that they will show that there'll be some longevity for people who do have extended fasting periods over extended times. So that's something exciting. Looks like strong science around it. I also like with fasting, for most people, that cuts down decision making. It's anything that I think when people change diet, I think if they make less decisions, have a protocol that they make less decisions, it actually ends up in higher compliance. And so I do really like that about fasting. It makes it simple for people. So I had a good mate of mine, his brother was really overweight, and he'd lost and gained weight and everything before, but I don't know why he started, but he just started eating 1 meal a day, and he ate whatever he wanted. This is Paulie's brother, Shauno, and he lost, I think over a year, he lost 60 kilos, and he's kept it for like 4 years. and he eats whatever he wants on that meal, but it just made it simple for him. Do you know what I mean? Like there's less decision, so I like that. And I really like that fasting actually gets typically people who are overfed, which is everyone really, we all go through the stages of overfed, is that we lack a sense of actually appetite. And there's two things, like you can either have hunger or cravings, and most people don't associate or don't know the difference. When you're in a fasted state, you start to recognize what real hunger is and the difference between having a craving and hunger. So I really do like that. So what is the downside? Now, this is the science. It's all positive, right, about health benefits for it. But I'll just give you a couple of points about, in my experience dealing with clients and lots of people who are doing this, is fasting can lead to a massive overcompensatory effect, be the pre or post. So, for instance, let's say you decide that Monday is the day that I'm going to do IF, so intermittent fasting, so I'm not going to eat Mondays, right? And you start doing it and see good results and you get through it and whatever. And as your time goes on, you might be on your fourth one, it's Sunday night and you know you're fasting and you know that you're going to lose 4 kilos on that day, is people start eating a lot more pre it, and they also start overcompensating post, right? And that can lead to disordered eating because they start a really this overconsumption on both ends, right? And then they see the weight loss piece and they start either changing the protocol to catch up or whatever because of the damage that they're doing. And I think there's something to be said about really monitoring that, because it can, the last thing you want to give people is an eating disorder. That's something to consider. And it's something that if I have clients going through, I get them to really be highly analytical of what they do pre and post. The other one that I'm not really keen on with it is I wish that is the massive weight loss swings. Like you guys, I reckon most of your eyes lit up when I said I lost over 10 kilos in a week. It's not weight, it's just water. It's just fluid moving around. At best, you can lose a couple of kilos of fat at best in a week if you really, really train a lot and you have low calories. So that psychologically for a lot of people, I find that's a problem, because that can lead, then they see the result on the scale, and then they go and have a big night or a big dinner, or go off the rails a little bit. They go, oh, you know what, I can fast tomorrow to make up for it, and that can lead to poor behaviours as well. So I guess that they're my two things from a behaviour point of view that I really need to manage people who start doing it, and there's a way to actually stop that as well. So. And it's my last point tonight. It's about the best protocol to stick to for you. So if you're going to try it, you need to set yourself a minimum of 12 weeks and keep the protocol exactly the same. So if you decide you're doing time restricted feeding, 8-hour feeding window, 16-hour fast, awesome, do it, and don't change it for 12 weeks until you have a good understanding of how you feel. And you might start overcompensating everything, but don't and eating a bit more on some days. It's okay, but just don't change the feeding window to make up for it. Right? By changing the window or the protocol, that can lead to actually some bad behaviours around fasting. So that would be number one for me. And the other tip I'll give you is actually putting the fast in the same example. Just say I'm using an 8-hour feeding window. For me, I'm an overeater, and most people are at night time. And so like me doing my feeding window and finishing my feeding window, say at 4 p.m. in the day, it actually negates a lot of that overcompensatory behavior, because I typically don't do that during the day, if that makes sense. So that can be a really smart thing to do. Or say you do intermittent fasting, where you're doing a set or like a 24-hour fast once a week, and your bad day of food is normally Sunday. Well, why not do it on a Sunday? Because if you put it on another day, that's where you usually typically overeat. you're going to start overeating on that day more than what you normally do, like as you come into your fast. So that'd be my top 2 tips with it. And that's all I got. Anyone got any questions? No? How was that?
That's good.
Great.
Good? Yeah?
That was great. Thanks, Sean.
Awesome, team.
Yeah.
Nick?
Yeah, I'd really strongly suggest you give it a go, like work it into your week, or
Okay, Jen.
man up and do a 3-day fast. See.
Do you think a 3-day fast or a 1-day fast a week is better than the time restricted fasting? Like,
No,
they're both equal.
Like, so the only difference, the one thing I will say with the longer duration fasts, they typically are the ones that are showing that autophagy effect. They haven't, they think it's evident in the shorter ones, so like time restricted, but they haven't proven it yet. They do think it's there. And it takes sort of that 2-3 days to get into a really ketogenic state. Now, there's also studies saying about if people are really strict on a ketogenic diet, they can achieve those same things, but not to the same levels of, say, of a 3-day fast. So I definitely think it's worth trying, just to try it, like an extended fast. But I would recommend, if you, especially if you're not used to doing it, to not, especially if you've got a really mentally stimulating job, it's obviously maybe doing it when you have a few days off, right? Something like that. Yeah, for sure. Cool.